Marcus Wellington had been the laughingstock of the Interstellar Defense Academy for 3 years running. While his classmates excelled in combat simulations and tactical warfare, Marcus spent his time in the library, buried in ancient military histories and outdated strategic manuals that most considered obsolete. His instructors tolerated him because his academic scores were flawless, but his physical performance was abysmal. Standing barely 5 feet 6 inches with thick glasses and a nervous stutter, he looked nothing like the warriors the Academy was meant to produce. The mockery reached its peak during his final year when Commander Harrison Bradley, a decorated veteran who had lost his left arm in the Proxima Centauri conflict, decided to make an example of him. Bradley had always favored the traditional approach to warfare: overwhelming force, superior firepower, and decisive action. He viewed Marcus's scholarly approach as weakness, a dangerous philosophy that would get real soldiers killed. During a particularly brutal training exercise, Bradley deliberately paired Marcus with the Academy's most aggressive cadets, hoping to wash him out once and for all. The simulation involved a complex urban warfare scenario where Marcus's team was tasked with neutralizing enemy positions while minimizing civilian casualties. His teammates, led by the arrogant but capable Jordan Reeves, ignored Marcus's suggestions entirely. They charged forward with standard assault tactics, achieving their objectives but with catastrophic collateral damage. When the simulation ended, Bradley stood before the assembled cadets, his weathered face twisted in disgust. "Cadet Wellington," he announced, his voice carrying across the training hall, "your performance today was not just inadequate, it was dangerous. Your hesitation, your overthinking, your reliance on dusty old books instead of proven tactics cost lives. In a real combat situation, you would have gotten your entire unit killed." The other cadets snickered as Marcus stood at attention, his face burning with humiliation. Bradley wasn't finished. "However, since you seem to think you know better than centuries of military tradition, I have a special assignment for you. The Kepler 442 situation has been dragging on for 6 months. 3 full battalions have been unable to break the enemy's defensive positions. Command is growing desperate, trying every conventional approach in the book. Perhaps it's time to try something unconventional." Marcus knew about Kepler 442. The mining colony had been overrun by separatist forces who had somehow managed to entrench themselves so effectively that no amount of firepower could dislodge them. The planet's unique crystalline formations created a maze of natural fortifications, and the separatists had weaponized the terrain to their advantage. Every assault had failed, resulting in heavy casualties and no progress. Bradley's smile was cruel as he continued, "You'll be deployed as a special military advisor. Your job will be to observe and provide tactical recommendations to Colonel Patricia Hayes, the commanding officer on the ground. Maybe your book learning will finally prove useful." The commander paused, letting the implications sink in. "Of course, we both know what's really going to happen. You'll spend a few weeks playing soldier. Realize that war isn't fought with theories and historical precedents, and come crawling back with a proper appreciation for how the real military operates." The assignment was clearly meant as a humiliation. sending an inexperienced cadet to advise seasoned officers on a conflict that had already defeated some of the military's best minds. Marcus understood the message. He was being set up to fail publicly, to prove once and for all that his academic approach was worthless in real combat situations. 2 weeks later, Marcus found himself aboard a transport vessel heading toward Kepler 442, his stomach churning with a mixture of anxiety and determination. The other passengers were replacement soldiers and supplies for the ongoing siege. They looked at him with curiosity and barely concealed amusement when they learned about his assignment. A fresh-faced cadet being sent to advise colonels and generals was unprecedented, and everyone assumed it was either a joke or some kind of punishment detail. The planet's surface was a hellscape of scarred earth and twisted metal. Months of bombardment had left the landscape pockmarked with craters, but the separatist positions remained largely intact. The crystalline formations that made the planet valuable for mining had proven nearly indestructible, creating natural bunkers and tunnels that conventional weapons couldn't penetrate. Colonel Hayes met Marcus at the landing pad, her expression skeptical. She was a compact woman in her 40s with steel-gray hair and the weathered look of someone who had seen too much combat. "So you're Bradley's wonder boy," she said without preamble. "I've got 3,000 soldiers under my command, some of the finest officers in the fleet, and we've been grinding our teeth on this rock for half a year. What exactly do you think you can tell us that we haven't already figured out?" Marcus straightened his shoulders, fighting down his natural tendency to stammer. "With respect, Colonel, I'd like to review your tactical assessments and study the terrain before making any recommendations." Hayes laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Knock yourself out, kid. My senior staff will brief you on everything we've tried. Maybe you'll spot some obvious detail that somehow escaped our attention." Over the next 48 hours, Marcus immersed himself completely in the tactical situation. He studied satellite imagery, reviewed battle reports, interviewed wounded soldiers, and most importantly, spent hours examining the planet's geological surveys. The crystalline formations weren't random. They followed specific patterns based on the planet's volcanic history and mineral composition. More critically, the ancient mining operations had created an extensive network of tunnels and chambers beneath the surface. The separatists had taken control of the main mining complex, which was built into the largest crystalline formation on the continent. The structure was essentially impregnable from above, and its elevated position allowed the defenders to control all the surrounding approaches. Every assault had followed the same pattern. Attacking forces would advance across open ground, come under devastating fire from the elevated positions, and be forced to retreat with heavy losses. Marcus spent his third night on the planet in the command bunker, surrounded by maps and geological charts. The solution, when it finally came to him, was elegantly simple. The ancient miners hadn't just created tunnels. They had created a complete underground transportation network that connected multiple sites across the continent. The separatists controlled the main complex, but they had overlooked several smaller mining sites that were still connected to the primary facility through the tunnel system. The next morning, Marcus requested a meeting with Colonel Hayes and her senior staff. The briefing room was crowded with majors and captains, all of whom looked at him with varying degrees of skepticism and amusement. Hayes sat at the head of the table, her arms crossed, clearly expecting to waste another hour on academic theories that had no practical application. Marcus activated the holographic display and began his presentation. "The Separatists have an impregnable position," he began, "but only if we continue to attack it directly. However, the geological surveys show that Site 7, approximately 30 kilometers to the northeast, connects to the main complex through the original mining tunnels. The tunnel system is still intact and appears to be unguarded." Major Robert Kim, Hayes's second-in-command, frowned at the display. "We surveyed all the secondary sites months ago. Site 7 is just a played-out quarry with no strategic value." "That's exactly why it's perfect," Marcus replied. "The Separatists dismissed it for the same reasons you did. But the mining records show that the tunnel connecting Site 7 to the main complex passes directly underneath their primary ammunition depot and power generation facility." Captain Lisa Torres, the unit's demolitions expert, leaned forward with sudden interest. "You're suggesting we infiltrate through the tunnels?" Marcus nodded. "A small team could access the tunnel system through Site 7, plant charges at critical infrastructure points, and neutralize the Separatist defensive capability from within. Without power and ammunition, their surface positions become untenable." The room fell silent as the officers considered the proposal. It was Hayes who finally spoke. "The tunnels have been sealed for decades. How do we know they're even passable?" Marcus had anticipated this question. "The geological surveys indicate stable tunnel conditions, and the mining equipment manifests show that atmospheric processors were installed throughout the system. Even if some sections are compromised, there should be multiple route options." Major Kim remained skeptical. "This is extremely risky. If the team gets trapped underground or if the Separatists discover the infiltration, we could lose people with nothing to show for it." "With respect, sir," Marcus replied, "the current approach has already cost us hundreds of casualties with no progress. This plan offers the possibility of ending the conflict with minimal losses." Colonel Hayes studied the display for a long moment. When she looked up, her expression had changed. The skepticism was still there, but it was tempered by something that might have been hope. "If we do this, I want you on the infiltration team. You know the plan better than anyone else." Marcus felt his heart racing. He had expected to provide tactical advice from the safety of the command bunker, not participate in actual combat operations. But he also understood that this was his chance to prove that his approach could work in the real world. The mission was scheduled for the following night. Marcus found himself part of a 12-person team led by Captain Torres, all of them experienced special operations soldiers who looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. None of them had ever operated with a cadet before, especially one whose combat experience was limited to training simulations. Sergeant David Murphy, a grizzled veteran with 20 years of service, pulled Marcus aside before they departed. "Listen, kid, I don't know what kind of strings you pulled to get on this mission, but down in those tunnels, rank doesn't matter. You follow orders, you watch your six, and you don't do anything heroic. We're not here to make you look good, we're here to complete the mission and get everyone home alive." Marcus nodded, understanding the message. These soldiers didn't trust him yet, and he would have to earn their respect through actions, not theories. The infiltration began at 200 hours. The team approached Site 7 under cover of darkness, using natural terrain features to avoid separatist patrols. The entrance to the mining complex was exactly where the geological surveys indicated, hidden behind a collapsed retaining wall that provided perfect concealment. Captain Torres used cutting torches to breach the sealed entrance, revealing a tunnel that stretched into darkness beyond the reach of their lights. The air was stale but breathable, and Marcus's atmospheric readings confirmed that the tunnel system was still structurally sound. They moved in single file through the narrow passage, Marcus positioned in the middle of the formation where the experienced soldiers could protect him. The tunnel system was more extensive than the surveys had indicated, with multiple branches and levels that created a three-dimensional maze beneath the planet's surface. Marcus proved his worth by navigating the complex tunnel system using the mining maps he had memorized. When the team reached critical decision points, he consistently chose the correct route, leading them deeper into the facility's infrastructure. His theoretical knowledge was translating into practical results, and he could sense the soldiers' attitude toward him beginning to shift. After 3 hours of careful movement, they reached their primary objective, the underground chamber that housed the separatist facility's main power generators. The space was larger than expected, filled with humming machinery that provided electricity to the entire defensive complex. More importantly, it was completely unguarded. Captain Torres quickly assessed the situation and began placing charges, while Marcus consulted his maps to identify the location of the ammunition depot. The facility's designers had prioritized security over convenience, placing the weapons storage in a separate chamber connected by a narrow service tunnel. Sergeant Murphy led the advance team toward the ammunition depot, while Torres completed the demolition setup. Marcus found himself alone with 2 soldiers in the generator chamber, surrounded by enough explosive charges to level several city blocks. The reality of the situation hit him then. They were sitting in the heart of enemy territory, completely cut off from support, with their lives depending on the accuracy of decades-old mining surveys. The communication from Murphy's team came through their encrypted radio. Depot secured. Multiple targets identified. Charges placed and ready for detonation. Torres checked her chronometer and nodded to Marcus. "Your plan, your call. How long do we give the evacuation order?" Marcus had calculated the timing carefully. The separatists would need at least 20 minutes to realize what was happening and begin evacuating their positions. But if they waited too long, enemy forces might discover the infiltration team and cut off their escape route. 15 minutes, he decided. That gives us time to reach the extraction point while ensuring maximum disruption of their defensive positions. The team moved quickly through the tunnel system, retracing their route toward Site 7. Behind them, the chronometers on dozens of explosive charges counted down toward zero. Marcus felt a strange combination of excitement and terror as they emerged from the underground complex and began their sprint toward the extraction point. The explosions came precisely on schedule. Even from their position several kilometers away, the team could feel the ground shaking as the charges detonated simultaneously. The Separatist facility's lights went out all at once, plunging the entire complex into darkness. Secondary explosions followed as the ammunition depot erupted in a series of massive fireballs that illuminated the night sky. Within hours, Separatist positions across the entire continent began surrendering. Without power or ammunition, their defensive positions were untenable. More importantly, their communication systems were down, leaving scattered units isolated and unable to coordinate any kind of organized resistance. Colonel Hayes's final assault began at dawn, meeting virtually no opposition. The Separatist forces that had held out for 6 months against 3 full battalions collapsed completely within 4 hours. The war that had seemed unwinnable was over before the evening meal service in the officers' mess. Marcus found himself standing in the command bunker, watching the final surrender ceremonies on the main display screen. Colonel Hayes approached him, her expression thoughtful. "I owe you an apology, cadet. And more than that, I owe you my gratitude. Your approach saved lives, both ours and theirs." The news of the victory spread quickly through military channels. Within days, Marcus received communications from senior officers across the fleet, requesting copies of his tactical analysis and strategic recommendations. The operation at Kepler 442 was being studied as a textbook example of how unconventional thinking could solve seemingly impossible problems. But the most satisfying moment came when Marcus returned to the Interstellar Defense Academy. Commander Bradley was waiting for him at the transport terminal, his expression unreadable. The man who had sent Marcus away as a joke now faced a cadet who had accomplished what entire battalions could not. "Wellington," Bradley said without preamble, "it seems I may have misjudged your potential." Marcus straightened to attention, but his voice was steady and confident. "Sir, I believe there's value in both traditional military doctrine and innovative tactical approaches. The key is knowing when to apply each one appropriately." Bradley studied him for a long moment. "Indeed. Report to my office Monday morning. We need to discuss your new assignment as a tactical instructor. It appears the Academy has much to learn from your experiences." As Marcus walked across the Academy grounds, he reflected on how dramatically his situation had changed. The same classmates who had mocked him now watched him with respect and curiosity. The instructors who had dismissed his scholarly approach were suddenly interested in his theories and methodologies. The greatest transformation, however, was in Marcus himself. He had proven that his academic knowledge could translate into real-world results, but more importantly, he had learned that confidence came not from avoiding challenges, but from facing them with preparation and determination. Commander Bradley had intended to humiliate him by sending him to an impossible situation. Instead, he had provided Marcus with the opportunity to demonstrate that sometimes the most effective solutions come from the most unexpected sources. The joke had indeed ended the war before dinner, just not in the way anyone had anticipated. Years later, when Marcus became one of the youngest generals in the fleet's history, he would often reflect on the lesson he learned at Kepler 442. True strength wasn't about overwhelming force or conventional tactics. It was about understanding your enemy, utilizing your resources creatively, and having the courage to pursue unconventional solutions when traditional approaches failed. The war had been won not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through careful study, patient analysis, and the willingness to see possibilities that others had overlooked. It was a lesson that would serve him well throughout his distinguished career, and one that he would pass on to the next generation of military leaders who would face their own seemingly impossible challenges. The separatist conflict had ended before dinner, but the impact of that victory would resonate throughout the galaxy for decades to come, proving that sometimes the greatest weapon in any arsenal is a mind willing to think differently about old problems.